It is very, very easy with no more than, say, 3 lines of code to create a Telegram client by just using this Telethon API. And here you can see all you have to do is pass in the fields for your bot token, which you'll have created, which only takes you about a minute to create, your API ID, which again only takes a couple of seconds to create, and your API hash. To get entities, so here you can await client.getEntity by their username, like that, and then to send messages to those entities. Which means if you didn't come to this session, with an idea for an API in place, I'd suggest to you that if there's ever a need for you to repeatedly notify yourself of some information in a fashion that is available to you on all the different devices you have. As we know, Telegram has a lot of clients across every platform. Those are fairly high quality native clients. There are notifications involved with those as well, which you can mute. So I could mute the notifications for this. Well, that ends up being a very easy thing to do. So if you didn't come thinking of a particular automation you want to do, I would encourage you to think, well, in what case would it be helpful for me to trigger a message to myself, a very easy message to myself, without having to deal with all the complexities of things like SMS that gets sent on some basis, maybe triggered by another API or just on a regular basis. So for example, you could easily create an alarm clock app for yourself that just messages you over and over and over at 7 a.m. when it's time for you to wake up. Well, the question would be, well, what happens when I get messaged back? How do I actually do some back and forth interaction? For example, here I have a bunch of the messages that I was sent from my Telegram bot. What happens when I send something back to it? And that ends up being a little bit trickier for us to deal with. Here, I'll show you what that might look like. The Telethon API, in addition to giving you access to these direct methods for interacting with that MT Proto API, also gives you a callback-based approach where you register particular callbacks on particular events. And so if you go into the telethon.events library, let's actually just import this ourselves, I can give you a sense of what kind of events are visible. Now, it is the case that not every one of these events will be available to you via the bot API, where they might be available to you via the standard API. But you can see questions like messages delete, or events like messages deleted, messages read, new messages. Let me show you what might happen if we trigger on new message. So what we'll do is we'll do a client.on events new message. We'll give this an asynchronous function that handles this. And we need to be able to debug this in some fashion. You can think that I don't quite know what that event object contains. So what I'll do is I'll use the breakpoint hook to put a breakpoint here. Now, the initial interactive use of this API was by just calling methods in order to trigger, say, sending a message by doing .sendMessage. Here, once I actually set up this simple framework with this callback, I'll actually need to start something in the background that'll listen for these events and trigger on these events. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to do a client, I believe this is run until disconnected, which will launch me into an event loop that will handle these messages. You can see it's already broken into that event loop. So let's see what our event object looks like. You can see here's a new message event object. We can do a dir on this thing, and we can see it'll tell us information like, is it from a channel, what the message is. We can get the information of this thing as a dictionary. We can get who the sender of this was. So let's see if we can do this. The Telethon API authors are strong believers in the use of basically string-style debugging, the kind of interactive debugging with print statements and breakpoint hooks and things like that. And they want to make this a little bit easier for you than it would be the case if you did something like, to dictionary. So if you look at this .stringify method, you can actually get a nice breakdown. I actually have to print this thing, not repeat this thing. I'm getting a nice breakdown of all the pieces that were here. And so we can see this message ABC, when it was sent, and we can see some information about who it was sent by if we dig into this a little bit more. That should correspond to the very first of the messages that I sent. And in fact, if I continue running, I should hit another breakpoint, and this other breakpoint should event.message.text be the next message that was sent, and so forth and so on. So let's see if I can disable my breakpoint and continue. Well, actually, let's just keep continuing until we get through all of these. There we go. And unfortunately, I think our session's kind of gotten itself into a bad state here, and so we'll probably have to kill this session and start over. But we can see that we can deal with responses to these messages just as easily as setting up a simple callback mechanism. So if we wanted to create just the absolute simplest version of an automation, some one individual bot that you can message back and forth that can keep track of the conversation, really is no more difficult than doing something like this. Maybe we identify the client that we're interacting with, and then we do a client on, new message, async def, handle with the event, and this event has a message text. And here is where we could respond to our user. So what that means is we should be able to set up a very simple echo server for ourselves, which is typically the starting point of a lot of these examples. Create some simple automation where if we communicate with this bot, it echoes everything back to us live. What I'll do is I'll clear my history. So we start from a starting point, and let's see if we can get this to work. We'll pull in our Telegram API ID. We'll put in our Telegram API hash. We'll put in our token. We'll look up this user, and then here we'll see if we can get our message text. And we'll send this back to the user. Of course, we should look at the sender here. But for the purposes of this, we'll just send this back, maybe all uppercase, maybe even repeat it in some fashion. So we'll do something like this. Here we can see, we'll repeat this thing like that. And if we run this code, so we'll kill our session here, and we'll run this. And I think it's what? We should have now something where if we send a message to this thing, should be able to respond to us. Let's running. Oh, and we'll of course have to put this into our loop. So we'll say from async IO import run into an async def main. We'll have to run these here like that, and then we'll register that here, and we'll do a little bit tricky here. Actually, I'll message, just to keep this very simple, we'll keep this out of that main, put that here, and we'll run this until disconnected. Oh, there we go. So this should give us a working simple echo server that shows us effectively what we can do with the core API. Telegram client. Okay. And of course, lastly, we'll need to get the client into SOAP. So we'll have to do this like that. As you can see, it's a little bit clumsy doing this just because. Okay. Remarkably clumsy to get this thing to work, and we have to give this session identifier so that it knows. And that should be good. Okay, hopefully that should give us a working bot that's running in the background. And of course, we're still missing one import. Okay, let's see if this gives us a working instance of our Echo server. Yep, there we go. So we can see, without too much effort, we have a working instance of an Echo server. So